There we
All
go.
right.
That's how we do
Look
it.
at Good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Yeah. Not quite
Yeah.
8 o'clock here on the U.S. East Coast. And what is today? Today is March
Today's
27th.
Wednesday. Yes.
Yeah. All right.
So, I don't know. Does that date these shows? I was watching somebody else. It's like, I don't talk about what day or date it is.
Oh,
It just
yeah.
dives right into it. But I don't know.
Now, I can understand in some contexts, right? Like maybe, again, I don't know if it was a developer show, a development programming show, because in some contexts, the content maybe is a little more date specific. Like if you were watching this even a year in the future, which really isn't that long,
Right.
then some of this information might, I mean, we don't know, could be superseded by what happens in .NET 9.
There you go. Yep. That's a possibility.
So it's the Dev Talk Show, and we are, if you've been following along, thanks for rejoining us, especially live. I absolutely love it when people can watch live. And if you're enjoying what we're doing, let us know down in the comments. Hit the like button on YouTube or whatever platform you're on, just because we really do look at the analytics, and there are some shows that have a lot more thumbs up and maybe a lot more comments, and that's kind of like, okay, well, maybe these are the ones that people are watching. So what we have been doing for some time is people who've been watching the show recently have seen that we have been working on the authentication that's built into the templates, or when you start a Blazor web application in .NET 8, there's been, .NET 8's ASP.NET Core 8's Blazor has been a shift to begin with, adding the server-side rendering and kind of making it the base foundation. I think, that's like the whole concept of render modes, where in the past you picked WebAssembly or you picked server and that was your choice. And now you have these render modes that can even be per component, maybe per page. And one of the interesting issues that we came along with is that when you say in the templates that you want support for authentication, you get support, but you also get a lot of code that may be unfamiliar to you.
Yes.
So we've been trying to figure out what that code actually does.
And if I remember right, it does a lot of different things. So it may do much more than what you need. So
right. Like in the box, like if you do nothing, if you just take the template and you just run it, it's using Entity Framework Core to hold a database of your users, and it securely holds things like usernames and passwords. And the password, it's not actually holding the passwords, it's using good practices to keep a hash, and it even goes a little bit further than that. If just in case somebody who's more familiar might want to know, it looks like it's stretching the stretching the hash, doing all the things it's supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me there. The mute button actually worked that time.
Nice.
So it's doing all the things that it's supposed to be doing. And then you can dig in and do a little bit of work to add external account providers. Like you could say, hey, I want to be able to log in with my Google account or my Microsoft account. And it handles all that. But I think a pretty common situation is I think there's a lot of people out there who are creating a new Blazor project. And I'm going to use this as an example, not that I'm driving specifically towards this, but you want it to work on a website that you're building for work. I think there are a lot of sites out there that are meant for your enterprise, for your organization. It might be some kind of internal tool. It maybe is never leaving the boundaries of your organization, but your organization might have users in a directory. Quite logically, it could be Azure AD or Entra ID, right?
Right.
Because even with some of the branding, when I go to work every day, the help desk is still calling it Azure AD. It's going to take a while for that to filter out, right?
Yeah, I think so. We're all still getting used to that.
Yeah, right. So what if I just want it to work for those users and I'm not interested in any of the other stuff? Well, you've got a lot kind of just hanging, right? So I would say the expectation for today is that we have a project we've been working on. We're going to bring that up and kind of talk through the steps of what you do kind of on your own. And then I think where we're left is that we could probably I think we should be able to create a component that logs you in across pages instead of where the template, it's kind of page based, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's almost have that global kind of aspect of, I'm on this app. I get, once I'm in, I get access across all the different things that I have.
Right. Yeah. So what did I bring up here? That's interesting. That I'm not seeing, what's really odd there is I was not seeing, the reason I'm clicking file new project here is just, but you're not seeing the file new project template, are you?
It flashed for a second, but that was it.
Huh. That's really interesting. Okay. I wonder if that's happened before. Meaning like when I've showed file new project before, I didn't even notice that it's not.
No, because I think in the past we've gone through and dug a little deeper around, well, what's in here? What are our options? How do we do it? And I know we've done that on the stream. There you go. Well,
yeah, but it sure is. And it's not flickering on my machine.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, all right.
Seems like we're there.
We're not going to dwell on this. The idea is just to show what are the options that you would choose. So if I create a new Blazor web app, and I'm just going to go ahead and let it say Blazor app 1. That's not super important to me.
Yeah.
We're saying .NET 8. The authentication type would be individual accounts to get the template pre-filled out. But what we've been working with, just to set the level here, level set for people watching, is interactive render mode of none and a per page component interactivity. There are many permutations of this. You could set this to Blazor server, which is the SignalR based circuitry, WebAssembly, which is probably what Blazor is best known for, or the brand new auto mode, which we have explored on this show.
Yeah.
But we're starting with none as it's kind of this, it's the simplest. And I do actually think there is a lot of cause for sites. Remember that internal site I'm talking about, that maybe it's a real CRUD based app of, we're going to pull some data out of somewhere, show it to you, maybe let you search through it, filter through it, maybe even edit it. But this is like I think a lot of enterprise websites are just a tool to let you look something up or validate something or maybe show a chart. And those are perfectly fine as totally 100% server rendered apps. They don't have an interactivity component, or if they did, maybe we could confine it to an island somewhere in the site. So these are the settings. And when I'm not actually going to create it because I already have it created. And
we just wanted to show you what you might do.
Yeah. And so when you have that, you get a program CS that looks like this. And when you compare that to, if you just simply leave out the individual accounts to say none, a lot of this stuff is not here. All of this is not here.
Yeah.
Actually, all of this.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So if you just simply click none and don't say that you want no authentication whatsoever, your app looks like that. And I think I have that sample too, just so you don't have to take my word for it. This was okay, but the only thing about this sample is this was where we were doing Blazor WebAssembly, so not quite. Like this would not be here.
Yep.
And neither would this.
Right.
Yeah. But you can see that it's like so much is gone. It's just add Razor components, set up the exception handler so that you get to see the errors, on your own system locally when you're developing. Let's make sure HTTPS redirection works and static files and anti-forgery. And again, these would not be here because these enable WebAssembly and they enable Blazor server. I mean, what a difference. All that code is new. And actually, here's another little bit down here.
Oh, yeah.
So what does all this code do? I don't know if that's the question you're about to ask.
Well, a little bit. I think that's where we're heading. I think I think what this does is show the extensibility of the Blazor template, right?
Sure.
And you can have very little, but you can go all the way down to the specific things that you need for your application. But that's a lot to add just to get authentication in place. So
yeah, right.
Where you're heading to dive through this, I think, is where all the questions really lie.
Yeah, because the first thing I asked myself is, what does all this really do? And the short answer to that is it enables ASP.NET Identity, which is I'm going to use the term subsystem within ASP.NET Core that it's a whole set of classes and even NuGet packages to support that enable your application to sign people in. Maybe, and there's authentication schemes are extensible here. Maybe put a cookie into the browser so that we have that old tried and true method of every time the browser comes back to the page, it's got, here's my cookie, this is my session cookie, and then the server says, well, I know, Rich, you're logged in. You logged in. 15 minutes ago you logged in, and I put this cookie into your browser. Yeah. Also, SPAs that tend to use like a JWT approach, which is, okay, here's your access token, and then you got to think about refresh tokens and all that. Identity supports all of that. But I will confess that identity is often a mystery to the developer. I confess to myself, I'm describing myself, someone who's been building websites on ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET for a very long time. Still kind of says like, well, the template gave me this and it works.
Hey, I just got to get stuff done. Maybe
I got to get things done. I got to get some work done. And I think one of the things that the way, and I never questioned this deeply until recently, because I think what this made me realize was that in a component-based world, which is what Blazor is, a component-based framework, it's more important to understand how this really works, because I now want to build components that I'm no longer in a page or controller-based scenario, like controller-based in MVC, page-based in Razor Pages, where page by page I can decide if there's authorization. Controller by controller, I can decide how the authorization works. When I'm building components, I may want to build that component completely ignorant of who's logged in and why, and let something at a higher layer decide whether I'm authorized or not, whether the user is authorized to see the component. Or even more than that, the component may want to say, listen, I'm not interested in the authorization, but I do want to provide different views based on whether this user is authorized or not. But I'm not going to examine the policy. I'm not going to examine the user. So we have this layered approach that now kind of, in my opinion, demands, okay, it's time to learn more about how this really works.
Okay.
So I'm going to move to, if you've been watching, you have seen that we have a Blazor Auth from scratch app that we've been building. And some of this is going to look familiar. You're going to say like, well, wait a second. I recognize some of this. And it's this section here. But there's a lot missing.
Yeah.
Right? So this particular example is a server-side rendered only. That's the only support that's been added so far. I believe that as we continue using this sample, we'll be able to start with this, and then we'll add in Blazor server later. And this is a real scenario you might face as a developer is, we started server-side rendered. We didn't think we needed interactive components, but we do. Or, you know how it is, the org comes across later and says, how can some of this app work offline? And so you say, well, we're going to need WebAssembly for that.
Right.
So you got to add this stuff in. You're not going to file new project it, right?
Yeah.
Especially when your app's ready and deployed and mature. Yeah. Hold on. I think I might have to let the dog out of the office. Hold on just a second.
No worries. It's all good. This is one of the, in addition to Chris and myself being the co-host here, we have another co-host who typically joins us in these sessions, and that is Chris's dog Scooter, who wants to have more and more of a vocal role in the session here. So,
well, he's just telling me that he didn't want to be in the office today, but I have to be careful because then he'll come back later and sit outside going like, hold on, the show was really interesting after all.
Exactly.
I was watching on my phone and so in any case, if let's just do a quick compare and then we can move forward. Quick comparison from the template. This looks familiar. We're using this. We're using some of this, but not all of it. And this right here. But a lot is being left out, and there's reasons why, because much of these services, much of them, not all of it, and we're still kind of learning, especially this part here. This part here is the part that is mostly the part that is setting up Entity Framework Core to be your user store for username password based login.
Okay.
And we are trying to avoid that for now, not because we don't like Entity Framework Core, we don't like the idea of local login, but and this adds the email sending for confirmation.
Yeah.
But we're trying to avoid it so that we can understand what's going on here. And so let's start with cascading authentication state, which we realized that we needed this because as it tells us right here, adds cascading authentication state to the service collection. This is equivalent to having a cascading authentication state component at the root of your component hierarchy. So what a mouthful.
Yeah.
A little bit is.
That sounds like a pretty important add there.
Right. And it took us a little while to understand that we needed that to enable a pattern that's pretty common to Blazor apps, which is using the authorized view component, which is a Blazor component. The way we know it's a Blazor component is, a good clue is being in the ASP.NET Core components namespace is a good clue that this is a in the box Blazor component.
Yep.
And we need it without authorized view looks to cascading authorizations. It looks to the authorization state provider to say, okay, authorization state provider, you're a service. I'm calling you up and asking you, do you have a user context for me so that I can figure out whether they're authorized or not? And more than just what you're seeing here, it goes a step further. It doesn't just figure out if they're authenticated. Are they authorized for this page based on the attributes you may or may not have set here? Maybe you want a certain claim, a certain role, a certain policy.
Yeah.
So that we tried rolling our own authentication state provider. And I think that's because I was kind of led that way by and I want to be fair that it's not criticizing the Blazor docs. It's that I found myself led that way because simply saying, oh, you can write your own authentication state provider. And I thought, I guess we're going to need that. Because we don't want the Blazor one. And it turns out, no, we want the server one, at least for this use case scenario. In the documentation, in ASP.NET Core, there's a whole Blazor section. So it goes, this is ASP.NET Core documentation from the top, but I kind of want to look at this whole tree.
Yep.
Because as you drop down to web apps, you get Blazor, and this is where most of this is coming from. I mean, everything that we've talked about is coming from here. And, expose the authentication state as a cascading parameter. It talks about all this stuff, and then it talks about creating your own provider. And so we kind of thought that that's the way we had to go, but then realized, no, this one that is provided by the framework, the server authentication state provider, was fine.
As long as we didn't, we didn't have to make any modifications to it. There was nothing that we were going to do customized to it. So using the out of the box one would work.
Right. And it's actually not very big. I hit F12 on my keyboard. And what's really cool is hitting F12 is to go to a definition of something. And this isn't even our code. This is ASP.NET. And we get using this what's called, the source server. It just automatically drops you in to, oh yeah, here's the source. Like I could have gone to GitHub and looked at this too. And what makes this work is you can implement your own authentication state provider, but we were kept running into like, well, how does it get updated? How does it get updated? Well, it turned out that implementing this interface was the trick. So in our sample version, which I might still have here, yes, I do. Our sample version never implemented that interface, just created an authentication state provider. And we were kind of wondering like, it doesn't seem like this is getting looked at.
Right. Yeah, it didn't get set up when we ran the application.
Yeah, like what? It worked, but it didn't seem to work like on startup,
Mm-hmm.
And so implementing this interface, I host an environment authentication state provider, which is something once again in the box. It's just a simple interface that's just got one method that gets called that says, hey, set authentication state. And it's even task based. So that what's really interesting about this is that even though this is not an async method, asynchronous code could await this task in order to see that it's resolved with whatever that state is. And the reason why they've done this is because going to find out how you're authenticated could be a network call. What if it's out to Entra ID or maybe to Auth0 or I don't know. It could be a database call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. That could be local stuff, or it could be, and often is, some cloud identity provider that you're connecting to.
Yeah, it could be local. And if it was local, then it's just basically the implementer of this just does a quick task from result and says, here you go, here's the answer. And so it's interesting. It's like they needed asynchronous, but couldn't rely on async await because not every situation uses it. So I just found that really interesting. And so once you have cascading authentication state, an authentication state provider, and then using the built-in server one was fine, you do need to add authorization and authentication. And at this point, these pieces of middleware, and then we're also saying that our authentication is cookie based. So please put a cookie on the system. That's it. Everything else was left alone. And now we started getting functionality out of the rest of the site. So people have seen that on previous episodes, and we're pretty much caught up here. This was the home page, and the home page just says welcome to your new app, but we've added to it. We've added a little bit here. We've added what do we want to show when someone's authorized? What do we want to show when they're not? And let's see. Let's run this and see where we're at. So our Hello World page, if you've been playing with or using Blazor, you've probably seen a million times this page with this purple gradient sidebar, but we've added a little bit to it, right? And just with so far, no entity framework, no username password combinations. Not that those are bad things. We're just trying to keep it real simple so that we can understand what's actually going on. Is it says you are not authorized, and it's showing this form of our very own.
Right.
So let's look at how that looks in code. The authorized view is saying no, nobody signed in here, so let's just show you are not authorized. But for now, for purposes of some learning, the form is outside of that context. Okay. So what's special about this page component? This is the home razor component. We've modified it a little bit. We know it's resolving the home page because there's just a slash. There is also not an authorized attribute here.
And that makes, I mean, when you think about the application, your home page probably makes sense. Well, can make sense depending on what you're architecting, right? Where you might want it to, everything's locked down, but in this case here, we want to at least land somewhere and then run, and then be able to move it out.
Right. So what isn't always obvious from templates is that, what if I need that mixed mode of I've arrived at a page and I want to know, are you authenticated? No, then I want to show you something, first of all, that's safe. And second of all, maybe helps you get authenticated. Or just lets you know, look, you can't get in here unless you belong, really.
Right.
And the way you accomplish that is by not adding an authorized attribute, and instead you are relying on the authorized view to do the work for you. And that authorized view does not function. All we have to do is just take out some of this stuff. In fact, I don't even know if we have to take it all out. Let me just take out add cascading authentication state. If that's not there, the authorized view component should be relying on it. And well, it actually seems to have still worked, which is good. But I'm curious what will happen if I try to log in. See, what's interesting is it still says you are not authorized, but let's see. I don't want to resubmit the form. Oh, it does say you are authorized, so that's interesting. I thought we had gotten to a place where we thought we needed this. Wouldn't that be interesting if I didn't need it? But because I am trying to figure out what the minimum is here. But what's allowing that to work is this should be, it could just be that the server authentication state is good enough. And then actually, no, there wasn't anything. This authorized route view. This component supplies a cascading parameter of type task, which makes the user's current authentication state available to descendants. So maybe the authorized route view is helping us there. That could be interesting to find out that we didn't necessarily need that. And I don't mind putting it back if we have trouble later. But the question now is, okay, so we saw that I was logged in.
Right.
And now the authorized path is firing up. It's detecting that I'm logged in with that username I gave. I know I didn't give a password, so that might seem interesting for people. That might like, wait a second, you didn't provide a password or anything. So we'll look at that in just a second. But what I want to show now is I don't have a way to log out here. Like, there's no way to log out of this. So if I close the app, I'm going to reopen the app. And oh, look at now, maybe this is, see, it says I'm not authorized. So what I wanted to do was open the F12 tools.
Okay.
And just because you may want to get here yourself with the F12 tools later, I'm going to make them a little bit bigger because you might have them full screen. A lot of times I'm zoomed in so people can see well at home, right? Is you want the application tab. And every browser has this setup. So you'll find it no matter what. And you want to find cookies. And the cookies for our localhost app, there is an anti-forgery cookie that's meant to help protect this login form.
Okay.
But that's it. There's nothing else. So let me log in. Let me log in again with just my username, and we'll go into in a second why can I only use username? And now we have the second cookie. And from this point forward, if I come back to the app and I maybe switch to the weather and then maybe switch back, it works. Everything's working. And what I mean by that is I'm still logged in, but maybe I can't close the app. That's the interesting thing. This cookie is providing the authentication. Now it's called ASP.NET Core Custom Authentication. Do you remember where custom authentication came from? Because people looking for the their own cookie later might say like, I can't find that custom authentication one.
There's no custom auth, but it could be whatever it was, because I think we defined that right in the startup. There we go.
Right. So just by simply saying custom authentication, by default, add authentication's add cookie method will use this as the cookie name. Now, I think this is true. I think I can drop in here. One of the things you can do with add cookie is you could just give it a scheme name, and it can be whatever I want, right? Like I can come here and I can say, like just happy days, right? Like anything. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yep.
I'm being silly on I'm being silly on purpose though, because now I'm not authorized. Let's go look at the collection. Oh, hold on a second. There's that custom auth cookie. Why am I not authorized? The reason I'm not authorized is because now the code says that my auth scheme is called happy days. So it goes looking for a cookie and it's like, I don't see one.
It's not here. So we don't know who you are.
So let's log in again. Log in again. And what I should see. Oh, I thought I would see.
We see refresh on the right? Next to the filter. There you go.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, I know why, actually. I know why.
What?
See, this is good. I actually kind of like when it's like, oh, I've made a mistake.
But there's a valid reason for it.
So there's valid reason. So I added the cookie happy days.
Yeah.
But it turns out, let's go digging around the rest of this app. Now is a good time to learn how the rest of this works. So let's go back to the home page. And our home page is in Pages Home. Okay. Now it's time to learn about our login form, because our login form is interesting. We're using the Blazor edit form components. So I'm not using like the form, the standard HTML form components, which you can use in Blazor, and you can get a lot of functionality that way.
Yeah.
But you can get a lot of functionality that way. And there are some questions coming along in the chat, which I do want to get to. So hang in there. Thank you very much for asking them. But I chose to use the edit form. I'm not really saying I don't know that I necessarily have a good reason, but I think it'll have a little bit more longevity, especially when we start adding, if we turn this into an interactive component.
Right.
All it does is take a username. That's all it does. It takes a username and it submits that. And when it's submitted, we go to a method right here in our page called onSubmit. And here's the page. Here's the code. We basically have a credential model. This is a homemade model. I made this up. In fact, here it is. It's right here.
I just want to know your name.
All it takes is the string. We could later add other interesting stuff there. And when submitted, as long as the model's not null, then we use plain old ASP.NET identity code to create a claim with the name and create a new identity. Eventually, what we want is a claims principal. Right. A claims principal identity that we craft just from this one claim. But notice all of these methods, claims identity, it wants a scheme. And a scheme is just the string. We renamed the scheme for the cookie.
Wow.
So by renaming... Go ahead.
How do you keep those in sync, right?
Yeah. This is not the way to do it.
No, it's not the way, because you see how easy it was to get them out of sync.
Yeah, this is not the way to do it. I think this is just a little bit more illustrative.
And I think if you go back and look at program, there was no space.
Oh, okay, great. I'm glad.
Maybe.
Yes, you're right. You were right. So what's happening is we're creating an identity that's valid for this scheme. And you can see in the IntelliSense, what claims do you want and what scheme are you using? Well, we're using the Happy Days scheme now. And then let's go ahead and sign in. This is an extension method that hangs off of HTTP context. And this extension method, let's see where it comes from. I think it comes from Blazor. No, it just comes from ASP.NET Core Authentication. So this isn't a Blazor specific thing, but it's a very helpful extension method that takes a scheme and takes a claims principle and says, okay, fine, I will sign that user in. And part of signing that user in is figuring out, well, what do you mean when you sign in? Oh, you want a cookie. So that's how it's all wired up. Well,
as opposed to doing a token, right? Because you could have add authentication .add token, right?
Yes, I could say like not that I'd use a bearer token, but well, I mean maybe I could. I don't know. But that's a different way. And then you got to come in here and you got to say, I mean, probably not what we would use. I want to say that there is. Oh, I could do things like I can add other types of cookies. I can add two-factor. But I want to stick with cookie. And except I got to supply the scheme.
Yeah.
You'll see in the templates. Let me grab the template real quick, and we will see, just so we can see what it looks like when you say file new project. They have some constants defined.
There you go.
Right.
So what's our scheme? What's our sign-in scheme? Okay.
Right. And I can even go further and say, well, where do these come from? There are some constants built right into the platform.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And what happens is these constants. So what would happen is if I use the constants, the cookie would say identity application. It would say, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with using these constants. I'm not, there's no disrespect to any of this. This certainly is a little bit easier to handle because you change it in one spot. Like let's say you wanted your own, change it in one spot, takes effect everywhere.
Because you could inherit from, or is that identity constants? Does it have an interface already created, or can you just inherit from it so you know kind of what properties to use?
That's a good question. Let's bring that back.
Because if you're going to want it, you can't. What you showed, you can't modify because that's the underlying source code.
It's part of the core. I suppose that since this identity prefix is here, it's private though. It's private though. So I don't know. That'll be something to look at another time, I think.
Yeah.
So in any case, let's see. Now that I've changed all of those things in all those places, which I admit, if you're watching and you're like, why are you changing a multiple? It's really just educational purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's open the
and
browser.
And then we probably should pause and address some of the questions before we get too long into this. Okay.
Right. So we had, thanks, Rykix, for joining us. Appreciate that.
Thanks, and then we had,
we had a great question here from Waleed. How can I implement the revalidating server authentication state provider with a token instead of cookies and flow that persistent state to my custom authentication state provider? That's a fantastic question. And the revalidating server provider is something that I see in the WebAssembly templates. And we have been starting with the base server template. And so like it even says in the next comment, using auto render mode. Absolutely. And auto render mode is definitely more complex, and it's something we want to get to and probably would have to get to in a future show. But as far as resources for that problem, again, I did talk a little bit about the official documentation, where as you scroll down on this left side here, the official documentation in web apps under Blazor, I have to scroll down a little bit. You get to security and identity. And in here, they talk about the differences between server and Blazor WebAssembly. And certainly talking through something like the state providers get more complex for client side, because the thing about client side authentication is that you have to call a server at some point to prove that someone is who they say they are. It can't happen client side. Like there's no way that JavaScript or WebAssembly can say, oh, I know, I'm sure that this person is who they say they are. There always has to be a step of talking to a server. And so what ends up happening is you have a much more complex, I even had that here. You have a much more complex version of the world, I think. Is this a sample that uses everything? Yeah, this is an interactive auto sample. And we're going to look at this. The authentication state provider is the persisting revalidating authentication state provider. Oh, are you muted, Rich?
Yeah, I muted for a second.
Yeah.
I think that's what Waleed was pointing out, right? In his comment.
How do I create my own? So I'm not sure that you'll necessarily have to create your own, because I think this is ignorant. I believe this is ignorant of whether you're using cookies. I believe instead what would happen is that you would not want to use add identity cookies. I think this is the method that's quote unquote doing it all.
Yeah.
Because it's an extension method that's coming in here and adding an application cookie, an external cookie. What is the external cookie? This cookie is designed to handle an external login from like a Microsoft account or something.
Okay.
This one talks about two-factor auth, and what this cookie does is once it's loaded up once you pass through two-factor auth. So I think that it's the add identity cookies that's getting you here, because I understand what the original question was, is I'd rather not use cookies. So I think, but I'm not sure, that we can say add. I don't know that there's a catch-all add identity cookies. That's the thing. So you might instead be saying add OAuth, but you'd have to fill that out, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this show, I think, because we have intentionally started with server side for this exact same reason, is building up to interactive auto.
Yeah.
Is going to take some work. So with our Happy Days authentication, if I go ahead and type in my username and click login, I now have a second cookie, ASP.NET Core Happy Days, right?
Yep.
So now if I'm logged in, everything's working, I'm authorized, the weather app works. The weather app, by the way, we haven't even shown, has an authorized attribute on it. So I can now just simply delete this cookie, and then I might as well delete the custom auth one too. It's not doing anything.
It'll clean up. Yeah.
And if I refresh, oh, you're not authorized anymore.
Oh, well, and it sent you out to there.
Yeah. Oh, and if I try to hit weather, it's going to it blows up because I don't have a real login page. So I quote unquote log in, and there's the cookie again. What I want to explore real quick is, let me restart the app, because I feel like the cookie should still be valid. And okay, all right, there it is. You're logged in. Yeah.
It's not like in-state memory or anything like that, right? It's persisting to disk.
Yes, cookies are sitting on disk. They're managed by your browser. They are a common and tried and true method that was used at the dawn of the web. It really was. It was one of the first things that was invented after we kind of realized, oh, the web is cool. How do I avoid this user having to prove who they are every time they go to a page?
Yeah.
Because that was one of the first things about the web that we didn't have. And when I say we, I don't know that I ever really experienced that, but maybe just before it started to hit I literally was in a university lab using the web, like on it might have been Netscape, it might have been Mosaic.
Oh yeah.
And cookies were already part of the system at that time.
Mm-hmm. Somewhere
they had a lot of growing up to do, because people would hack them and so on.
Yeah. And like anything that grows up, sometimes it turned bad and we have to correct.
So we have things now like HTTPS strict and HTTPS only, which basically tells the browser, okay, don't you dare let JavaScript in here. So let's see if we can finish this off here. What we don't have right now is this is not a component, right? This isn't a component. This is part of the page. And in fact, if I go one step further, like I suppose I could move this login section. I could make this a little clearer by moving it into not authorized. Because the only time you'd ever want to show somebody that is if they weren't authorized. Oh, what happened? I lost it. So let's add it, and then we'll run again. And again, that's still not a component. Oh, there's build errors. Because what did I do? This child content element uses the same parameter as the enclosing child content. Oh my gosh. Woo! That makes me wonder now. It's complaining about this component edit. What is it saying? The child content element of component edit form, which we don't even see here, uses context as enclosing. So I wonder if what it's complaining about is that I used authentication state context up here. Let's see. Because see, the authentication state is providing this variable context, and now there's a conflict. Well, that's fun. So I wonder if I don't want to do this, because we've done this before. We've done this before, but we did it a different way. So let me...
I mean, just for comparison, do you know what the different way was?
Yeah.
I mean, not that if you don't, fine. I'm just kind of, because I'm sure they're curious. I'm curious.
Yeah. No, we did, and we actually even did it on the show. Frankly,
which is probably I don't remember, but that's okay.
Okay. No, I just got to find it. So instead of it being in a page, let's create a new component. We're going to add a Razor component, and just for naming purposes, so that's very obvious, I'm going to call it my own login. So it's not the one that's built in, nothing like that. We should be able to identify it more quickly. And the my own login component, this is not a page now. This is a component. Now,
right.
It's
because we don't have the page directive at the top.
Exactly. We don't have the page directive at the top. And what we can do here is we can put an edit form. Okay. And then the first thing that happened is it starts saying, well, hold on, you're not using some stuff. What is it complaining about? Remove the input text tag. No, I kind of need the input text tag for at least a second here. Don't I? Oh, that's not what it's complaining about. I need a model. So I should really pull this out somewhere else, but we're going to, I mean, this really should be somewhere else, but I don't really need an email address. We're just going to have a name be good enough. And I don't really need the password. And then what are you complaining about now? Oh, yeah. It's saying, well, wait a second. You don't have a model. That's true.
So put that down in the code block.
So we'll create a named credential. Okay, that was pretty good. And what else do we need? We need to make sure that a model exists when the application starts.
Okay.
That's just to make sure that that isn't null, which would then blow up. And then I think yeah, go ahead.
Not to take off on a tangent, but that supply parameter from form. So that means even though you're newing it up in the oninitialized, we're still getting the value from what's in the form.
What it's saying is that,
form.
Yeah, it's saying when the user clicks submit, it's going to come down to a method we haven't even exposed yet.
Yep.
And without this attribute, this will not work in Blazor server. I don't want to say Blazor server meaning SignalR. It will not work in the server rendered mode, in the
interactive server
side rendering, non-interactive.
Gotcha.
Non-interactive.
Okay.
And so what this parameter does is it tells Blazor when somebody goes looking for this model in the code, it might be in form data. Which it is, because this is how a server-side app works. When we switch this to being Blazor Interactive, and start using Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly, then a lot of this stuff won't require a little bit of this hand holding, because in those modes, as you type stuff in, two-way communication is going on, updating what's happening behind the scenes. This is something you have to use in order to be able to get, it's what it's just telling you is that you're going to find this model in a form submission, which we are. That is what's going to happen. I need to copy the form submission. Let's copy this form submission from earlier into our own component. Wouldn't that be cool if this all worked?
Huh.
And now it's saying, oh, you're not including identity. So that's true. I'm not.
Yeah.
And I'm not including authentication. Give me that refactoring there. Oh, no, I don't want to rename it. Oh, you know why it's not giving me that? Because I have not brought in this cascading parameter. So if I don't bring in this cascading parameter, then how can I possibly ask Visual Studio to give me the correct using statement? So now we have some using statements at the top that lit up this stuff at the bottom. So now I have a component that is sitting here ready to sign people in. At least let's hope so.
Yeah.
So I can go back to the home page. Wouldn't that be, this would be really cool. And we don't even have that anymore. I took it out, it's gone. And instead, what we do is we say, you're not authorized. And we say my own login. And I don't have any parameters or anything for it. That's it. So let's go. Look at that. It even built. And we know we're authorized, which I think is because there might be a cookie sitting back there. Let's get rid of it. Yep, that Happy Days cookie is there. Get rid of that. And look at this component now popped up. So let's review real quick, because that might have been pretty quick. Here's home.razor. There's an authorized view component that's deciding whether to show this code that just tells you who you are, or should it show you this code that includes our brand new component. So we have done something that the templates are not doing. The templates are putting login on a page. We have now put it in a component.
Which is quite often, when you think about users and interactivity, they say, well, why do I have to go to another page? Just do it here, right?
Yeah, right. And that's our end goal. The component has a form that lets me submit a name, and should everything work correctly, just by typing that name, no other authentication is happening here, which we will address another time. No other authentication is happening. We're basically just saying like, hey, your username's fine. Let's create a claims principal and let's drop it in here. Now, obviously in the future, we're going to want to get this correct. But now that we've seen all that working, we've seen all that code, that login is now a component. It is no longer embedded into the homepage. I'm going to click submit. The Happy Days, we're not redirecting either, which is something we've got to do. We've got to add in that after login, we should get you to a place where you recognize that it worked. We didn't do that. You've been logged in thanks to the cookie, but I've got to do something weird, like go click somewhere else.
Right.
That's weird. So redirection has to happen. But this works. This login component is logging us into the application, creating the cookie. If all I got to do is just destroy this cookie and it no longer functions, at least I'm no longer authorized. Oh, and by the way, the weather page doesn't work because the weather page requires authorization. It's trying to redirect to a login page that we do not have set up yet.
Yep.
And it just doesn't work. So the value I hope for people watching is that by building this from scratch, number one, we're saying no magic. But number two, you can have the auth system you want. You can go to where you want to get to, which I think in our next episode is we want to get this component up here in the right-hand corner so it appears page after page after page, like log in wherever you are.
Right. As long as that page doesn't say you need to be authorized, it's just there for you to interact with whenever you need to.
Yeah, right. Now, I think 9 o'clock is stand-up, and we both have some meetings to get to. Again, it's our show before stand-up. Hopefully, it helped you out. We had a lot of great questions today. I know like Waleed had a great question about, how we do this. Essentially, I think what you're really asking is how do I do this with tokens instead of like I want it to be treated like a spa. And I think if you want to just look at code, then I would don't create auto for now. I would maybe consider creating a Blazor WebAssembly app with global authentication and then go dig into that persisting revalidating provider and see what it's doing. I think the concern is that it's using cookies. I don't want to use cookies. I want it to be a token. So that's interesting because I haven't really explored that yet. I've been okay with cookie authentication just to learn the auth.
Yeah. But then we get into, if I understand, having that inside of, we're talking about having that be inside of the WebAssembly, right?
Right.
And then you have to think about authorization and authentication differently when you're in WebAssembly. Right. You don't want to store things in there like cookies.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting world. Your app might be offline. Those are all things that we know we want to get to, is building quality offline apps. How do you do that? How do you do that in Blazor? There's probably a lot more work on you to go say, okay, is the server there? No, it's not. Well, I can store some stuff here, but I don't know for sure if this is all going to prove to be valid or authorized because you just don't know.
Right. Yeah.
All right, Rich.
All good stuff to dig into.
So hopefully that show helps folks. That's what I'm hoping, is that if you watch today, what I would like to do is get this into a GitHub repository. We'll see if we can get that into the show notes so that you can go over the code yourself and then keep building on this sample. And until we get to where we want, which is not just log in and log out and all of those things, external logins we really want. And then let's start adding in interactivity and see how does that change the game? Does it start interfering or not? We don't know.
All good stuff. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And thank you all for watching and everybody with the comments and saying hello and all that. That's awesome. We love the feedback and interaction. If you're watching in the future, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think. Ask your questions there as well, because we do check them. And if for those who may not know, we all have our shows archived up on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TheDevTalkShow. So thanks for watching. And for Chris Gomez and myself, Rich Ross, have a great rest of your day.